The first thing the border scanner caught was not a ship. It was a silence. Every channel on Relay Station Bravo went dead for 4 seconds before the warship decloaked. That was the Drackery way of saying, "We are here, we have always been here, and you only know about us because we allowed it." Station Commander Holt was in the middle of signing off on a water recycler report when the silence happened. He set the report down slowly, looked at his duty officer, and said, "Get everyone off the docking level except essential crew. And someone go find Darren and tell him to stay in the East Wing until I say otherwise." The duty officer asked why Darren specifically. Holt said, "Because he will absolutely wander over to look at the Drackery ship, and I cannot deal with that today." The warship was long and dark, the color of something that had never needed to hide because nothing had ever hunted it. It moved without sound, which should have been normal in space, but somehow it felt deliberate, like the ship had chosen silence the way a person chooses not to blink. It docked with a precision that made the station's automated guidance system completely unnecessary, which was either impressive or insulting, depending on how you looked at it. Vara came down the boarding ramp third. Not first. Third. 2 of her honor guard came first, scanning, reading the air, their carapaces faintly lit in the pale yellow of professional alertness. Then Vara. Then 4. More behind her. She was tall enough that she had to angle her head slightly to clear the corridor entrance. Her armor was not ceremonial. It had scratches on it. Real ones. The bioluminescent patterns under the plates along her neck and jaw were flat and controlled the color of deep water, which the station's xenobiology guide listed as dominant calm, which really meant, "I have assessed this situation and found nothing here that frightens me." Holt met her at the end of the docking corridor. He did not extend his hand, because the briefing notes said Drackery considered that gesture either a challenge or an oddity depending on context, and he did not feel like finding out which. He simply stood where he was, in a clean uniform, and said, "Commander Vara, thank you for coming in person. I am Station Commander Holt. Your sons are safe." Vara looked at him for a moment before she spoke. When she did, her standard was precise and unaccented in the way that meant she had learned it deliberately, not casually. "I will determine that." "Of course," Holt said. "I'll take you to them." They walked. Holt kept the pace even and did not fill the silence with noise, which Vara noted. Most humans filled silence with noise. This one did not. That was either discipline or something else. She filed it away. The station was modest, functional. The walls had equipment panels, and the occasional faded marking where someone had tried to hang something and been told not to. The artificial lighting was set to mid-cycle, which meant a warm orange tone that did nothing for Vara's threat assessment, but was apparently preferred by the human crew for something they called morale. She had read everything available about this station before she came. It was a refueling and communication post, 31 permanent crew, not a combat installation. The border skirmish that had resulted in her son's capture had not happened here. They had been brought here afterward because this was the nearest facility with a medical bay. Dren and Rail had been on a scout run. A simple circuit. They were not soldiers. Yet, not fully. They had passed their rights 6 months ago and were still in the early posting period, where young Drackery learned the shape of real space. Before they were trusted with real missions. The right made them adults. It did not make them stone. Their ship had taken damage from a debris field that a border incident had kicked loose. The humans had found them drifting. Vara had received the notification 4 days after it happened because the ceasefire communication channels moved slowly and carefully, and no one on either side wanted to send the wrong word and restart a war. The notification said, 2 Drackery nationals, young, alive, in human custody, arrangements for return being made through proper channels. She had not slept properly since. Not because she was afraid. Vara was not afraid of many things, and she had trained herself out of the rest. She had not slept because she was calculating every variable, every possible condition her sons might be in, every scenario in which the word alive meant something other than what it was supposed to mean. She knew what her people did with captured enemies when the situation was complicated. She had done it herself, once, a long time ago, and she did not Think about that unless she had to. She did not know what humans did. That was the part that kept her awake. They reached a junction in the corridor. Holt paused. He turned to her, and she noticed something shift slightly in his expression, not nervousness. Exactly, but the careful look of a person choosing their words. He said, I want to prepare you for what you're going to see. Vara's markings did not move. She said, prepare me. Holt said, they're fine. I want to be clear about that first. They are. Completely fine. But the situation is, he paused again. It might not look the way you're expecting. Vara said, then show me. Holt nodded and turned down the corridor. Behind her, she heard one of her honor guards shift weight. She did not look back. She had come here ready for the worst. She had not considered the possibility that the worst would not be waiting. The door was already open. Not broken open. Not forced. Just open, the way a door gets left when nobody inside is worried about what might walk through it. Holt stopped just short of the doorframe and stepped to the side. He did not go in. He simply gestured, quietly, with one hand. Vara stepped forward and looked through the door. The room was small. A crew lounge, low light. A few chairs, a long couch. Against the far wall, someone had left a half-eaten food packet on the table. Gear was stacked neatly in the corner, the kind of casual neatness that came from habit rather than discipline. The air recycler hummed. On the couch was a human. He was reclined at a slight angle, shoulders against the armrest, one leg stretched out and the other bent. He had a small tablet in one hand. He was not in full uniform, jacket off, boots off, wearing the simpler underlayer that Vara's briefing notes identified as standard human off-duty clothing. Dren was on his left side. Her older son was tucked against the human's ribs with both arms drawn in, his carapace rising and falling in the long, slow rhythm of genuine deep sleep. The bioluminescence under his plates was cycling in soft, rolling pulses of gold, warm, unhurried gold, the color that Vara had watched from across a room when her sons were very small, and she stood guard so they did not have to. It was the color of a Dracari who felt completely safe. Rael was worse. Her younger son was on the human's chest, actually on it. One clawed hand was curled loosely in the fabric of the human's shirt. His head was down. His markings were not moving at all, fully stilled, the deepest level of Dracari. Sleep, the kind that meant every system that could relax had relaxed. The human Darren, the name surfaced from the briefing notes without being asked, was awake. He had looked up the moment Vara appeared in the doorway. His eyes were calm. There was no fear in them, which was not what she expected, and no aggression either, which was also not what she expected. He looked at her for 1 second. Then he raised one finger slowly to his lips. He glanced down at the two Dracari sleeping on him, then back at her. His expression said something that did not need translation. They just got settled. I would really rather you did not wake them. Behind Vara, one of her honor guard made a small sound. She put one hand back, without turning, and the sound stopped. She stood in the doorway. She had stood in doorways of burning ships. She had stood at the entrance of enemy command rooms with blood on her boots. She had stood at the edge of decisions that ended thousands of lives and made every one of those decisions without her hands shaking once. She stood in this doorway, and for a moment she did not know what to do with what she was seeing. Her sons were not broken. They were not diminished. They were sleeping with the absolute, boneless, uncomplicated piece of creatures who had been afraid, and then had stopped being afraid because something safe had found them in the dark. The human had not moved. He was still looking at her, patient, unhurried, one finger still lightly at his lips. His tablet had gone dark auto sleep. He had stopped scrolling to look at her and had not started again. Vara stepped into the room. She did it quietly. The boots of her honor guard did not follow, and she did not signal them to stay back. They simply read her and stayed. She crossed to the far side of the room and stood near the small viewport. The dark of space was behind her. She looked at her sons. Rael shifted slightly in his sleep. His claws tightened briefly on the human's shirt, then relaxed. Darren looked down at Rael when it happened, with the automatic reflex of someone checking that everything was still okay, then looked back up at Vara. She studied Darren's face. She was good at reading faces. Dozens of species, hundreds of individuals. She had learned to find the lie in a face before the mouth had time to speak. She looked at this human, and she looked carefully. There was nothing there that she could file under threat. No performance of kindness designed to signal something else. No discomfort being managed. He was simply in the room, present, doing the specific and unremarkable thing of sitting still while two living creatures slept on him and treating that as the most normal thing in the world. Vara's markings moved. Just once. Barely. A single, brief pulse of amber along the line of her jaw, the amber that her sons, if they had been awake, would have recognized instantly, because it was the color she had spent 20 years of wartime learning to suppress. It was the color that meant, you are alive and I can see it with my own eyes. And now I can put down the weight I have been carrying since the day they told me you were gone. She controlled it in under a second. Darren probably did not even notice what it was. He just watched her with those calm, uncomplicated eyes, and then quietly, carefully, so as not to wake either of the Dracaries sleeping on him, he reached over and picked his tablet back up and went back to scrolling. Like it was nothing. Like she was not the most dangerous person who had ever stood in that room. Like her sons were just two tired travelers who had needed somewhere soft to land, and he had simply been the closest thing. Waking a Dracarie from deep sleep requires patience. You do not touch them suddenly. You do not make sharp sounds. You bring the light up slowly and you let them surface on their own, because a Dracarie pulled from deep sleep too fast will come up swinging on pure reflex, and a young Dracarie with new combat training and a startle response is a problem. Nobody needs in a small room. Darren knew none of this. He just shifted slowly, said their names quietly twice each, and waited. Dren woke first. His markings cycled from gold to a startled pale white, and he was halfway upright before his eyes actually focused. The white shifted to orange disorientation, and then he saw his mother standing across the room, and the orange went a deep, mortified red. Rail came up slower. He blinked, looked at the ceiling, looked at Darren, looked at the room, looked at Vara. His markings skipped 3 colors in about 2 seconds and settled on a red very similar to his brother's. They sat up. They straightened. They looked exactly like soldiers who had just been caught doing something that soldiers were not supposed to do. Vara said nothing. Darren got up from the couch without any particular ceremony, stretched his back with an expression that suggested it had not been the most comfortable few hours of his life, and walked to the small counter on the side wall. There was a heating unit there. He started preparing cups of something without being asked. Vara finally spoke. She looked at Dren and said, in Dracarie, "Tell me." Dren told her. It came out in pieces at first, the way things do when you are trying to explain something that made sense when it was happening but sounds strange out loud. Their ship had hit the debris cloud. Systems had gone. They had managed to send one short-range distress signal before the communications array burned out. The humans had found them 6 hours later. They had been brought here. The first day was bad, Dren said. They did not know if they were prisoners. Their translator chips had taken damage and were giving partial output at best. No one on the station had Dracarie. They were put in a small room with food that they did not know was food, and a medical scan that they did not know was a medical scan, and a human who kept making a face that apparently meant friendly, but which, without context, did not read as friendly. They had stayed in the corner of the room for most of the first day. Rail picked up the story there. He said that on the first night, they had not slept because the stress of not knowing kept pulling them back up every time they got close to rest. By the second night, they were beginning to feel it. Not pain exactly, but the deep, crawling wrongness that happened when a Dracarie who needed anchor contact went too long without it. The lights felt wrong. The sounds felt wrong. Everything felt slightly unreal at the edges. Then they heard something outside the door. Darren set 2 cups on the table near the couch and returned to the counter. Without comment, Vara noticed that he did not look at her directly while her son spoke. He was giving them the room. That, too, was something she filed away. Rail said the sound was low, steady, like nothing either of them had heard before. Their translator chips caught almost none of it, but it came through the door without stopping, and it did not sound like threat assessment or commands or any of the 100 sounds of a military installation. It had a shape to it, a pattern. It repeated. Dren said that without meaning to. Both of them had stopped being afraid. Not gone afraid. Not nothing. But the crawling wrongness had gone quieter. They had moved closer to the door. They had sat down against it. And somewhere, between one repetition and the next, without deciding to, they had slept. The room was quiet when he finished. Vara looked at Darren. Darren had 2 cups ready. He set one within her reach, not pushing it at her, just placing it close, and held the other in both hands. He had the look of someone who had been through an experience they found meaningful but had no particular desire to dramatize. Vara said, "What were you doing outside the door?" Darren said, "The bio-monitor on their room was showing elevated stress signals. I'm not trained for xenobiology, but I've done some informal medbay work. I could see the readings going in the wrong direction. I couldn't talk to them. I didn't have Drackery, and their translators weren't working." He paused. "I didn't really know what else to do, so I just sat outside and sang for a while." Vara said, "You sang?" Darren said, "Yeah." Vara said, "To 2 unknown alien life forms. Through a door. At night." Darren appeared to consider this description of his actions. "When you say it like that, it sounds..." He stopped. "Yeah, that's basically what I did." One of Vara's honor guard, still at the doorway, made a very quiet sound. Vara said, "What song?" Darren said it was an old one. From his family. His grandmother had sung it to him when he was small and had bad dreams. He did not know if any of the actual words came through the door. He said it mostly in case the sound of it came through, even if the words did not. Vara was quiet for a moment. She looked at her sons, who were holding their cups of whatever Darren had made them, marking still a faint, embarrassed red, but beginning to settle. She looked at Darren, who was sitting on the arm of a chair now, comfortable, unhurried, like this was a completely ordinary conversation. She said, "Tell me the name of the song." He told her. She said nothing more about it. She did not explain why she wanted to know. But when she turned to look out the viewport a moment later, her markings had shifted briefly, barely, to the quiet amber again. Holt's office was small and slightly too warm, the way offices on long posting stations always became when the person inside stopped noticing the temperature. There was a plan on the desk. A real one. Vara looked at it once and then did not look at it again. She had asked to speak with him alone. Her honor guard was in the corridor. Her sons were back in the room with Darren, who had apparently offered to show Rail something on the tablet and had gotten no resistance whatsoever. Holt sat. Vara did not. She stood near the viewport and looked at him and said, without any preliminary, "I am going to tell you something that is not classified. It is simply not spoken of. You should understand the difference." Holt said, "I understand. Not classified means your people can know it. Not spoken of means we have chosen not to share it because information about a species' vulnerabilities becomes a tool in the wrong hands, and we have never been in a position to trust that the hands holding it would be the right kind." She looked at him steadily. "I am telling you because what happened here requires context, and because I think you need to update your protocols." Holt folded his hands on the desk and said nothing. He was listening with his full attention, which was, Vara had noticed, something he was actually capable of. She said, "When a Drackery completes their rite of adulthood, they are recognized as adults. They have legal standing, combat rights, the ability to enter contracts and hold rank. This is accurate. What is not discussed outside our people is that the right changes their status before their neurology catches up." Holt said slowly, "Meaning?" "Meaning they are adults. They are also not yet complete. The stress regulation system, the part of our biology that governs our bioluminescent response, our sleep cycle, our ability to process sustained fear, does not fully stabilize until somewhere between 8 months and 2 years after the rite. It varies by individual. During that period, young Drackery require what we call anchor contact." She said the Drackery term for it, and then gave him the translation: physical closeness, warmth, presence. Not constant, but regular, reliable. The presence of a known, trusted body nearby, especially during sleep, especially during stress. Without it, a young Drackery whose fear response is activated will begin to spiral. The bioluminescent system starts running patterns it cannot complete. Sleep becomes difficult and then impossible. At the outer edge of it, if the spiral runs long enough without interruption, the neurological effects become permanent. Holt was very still. Vara said, I calculated my son's maximum window before I came here. There. Right was 6 months ago. They are in the more vulnerable portion of the transition. They were isolated, in a high-fear situation, without any anchor contact, with damaged translators that could not tell them whether they were safe or not. She paused. My calculation gave them 6 days before the spiral would have caused lasting harm. Holt said, they were here 5 days. Darren found them on the 2nd day. Vara's voice did not change. He sat outside their door on the 2nd night. By the 3rd morning, the spiral had stopped. They have been stable since. The office was quiet. Holt looked like a man who was doing fast arithmetic in his head and not entirely liking the results. He said, if he hadn't done that. By the time I arrived, the conversation would have been different, Vara said. Simply. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll need to pass this to Xenobiological Services. We can update intake protocols. If we ever have young Dracari in our care again. Yes, Vara said. That is why I am telling you. Holt nodded. He looked at his desk for a moment. Then he said, Darren doesn't know any of this. He had no idea what he was actually doing. I know. He just thought they were scared and he wanted to help. I know, Vara said again. Holt was quiet for another moment. Then, carefully, like a man testing the weight of something before he committed to it, he said, Commander. For what? It's worth. When I assigned Darren to check on them informally, I did it because he is the most patient person on this station. I didn't know about the biology. I just knew that if anyone was going to figure out how to help without being able to talk to them, it would be him. He has a way of Holt paused, seemed to search for the right word. He makes things feel safer than they are. I don't know how he does it. It's just a thing about him. Vara looked at Holt for a long moment. Then she said, that is not a small thing to be. Holt said, no, I don't think it is. She turned back to the viewport. The dark outside was the same dark she had looked at from the bridge of her warship for 20 years. It was the same dark her sons had drifted through in a dying ship, frightened and alone. She said, your people have a talent I do not have a tactical category for. Holt said quietly, what's that? Vara said, you see something that needs comfort and you give it before you have finished deciding whether it is your problem. Holt smiled, which was a human expression she generally found difficult to read. This one seemed genuine. He said, we get in trouble for it sometimes. Vara said, I imagine you do. She straightened. The conversation, as far as she was concerned, was over. But she stopped at the door and said, without turning around, the plant on your desk. Is it alive? Holt said yes. She said, it requires consistent, reliable care to survive in an artificial environment. Holt said yes again, a little more slowly. Vara said, interesting thing to keep, and walked out. Docking bays on small stations have a particular sound when they are waiting for something to leave. The hum of systems holding ready. The faint pressure. Change as the seals prepare to cycle. A background hiss of recycled air that you stop hearing unless it stops. Dren and Rail were armored up. It was the right thing to do. They were returning to a Dracari warship, to their unit, to the structure of military life, and they understood this. Their markings had been holding an even professional blue for the past half hour. They were trying very hard. Darren was there because no one had told him not to be. He had shown up with his jacket only half fastened, carrying his own cup of something, and stood slightly off to the side in the way of a person who is present but is trying to take up as little space as possible. He was not looking at Vara. He was looking at Dren and Rail. Rail was the one who moved first. He crossed the distance between them with 3 deliberate steps and stopped in front of Darren. He was nearly as tall as his mother now. He had not been 6 months ago. The right changed the body as much as it changed the standing, and he was still getting used to his own size. He looked at Darren and said something. His standard was broken and partial, the translator still rebuilding itself from the damage. What came out was, you stayed. Just that. 2 words. Darren said, of course. Rail's markings shifted. The professional blue went deep and dark and slow. A long, rolling pulse of a color that had no easy human equivalent, but which Vara, watching from 3 meters away, recognized as the Dracari expression of gratitude that did not have a ceiling, the kind that did not end when the moment ended, the kind that got carried. Rail did not seem to know what else to do with it, so he stood there and let it show, which was its own kind of courage. Dren was quieter about it. He came forward, stopped in front of Darren, and said nothing at all. He looked at him for a long moment, the thorough, serious look of someone memorizing something. Then he raised one clawed hand and placed it flat against Darren's chest, directly over his heart. He held it there. 1 second, 2, 3. Then he dropped his hand, stepped back, and returned to his position beside his brother. His markings were perfectly still, the absolute control of someone holding themselves together very carefully. Darren looked at his own chest for a second. He seemed like a man who had just been handed something valuable and was not entirely sure how to hold it without dropping it. Vara walked forward. Her honor guard did not follow. They read her, as they always did, and held position. She stopped in front of Darren. She was taller than him by enough that he had to look up slightly to meet her eyes, which most people found uncomfortable. Darren did not seem to find it uncomfortable. He just looked at her steadily. With those unhurried eyes, her bioluminescent markings were moving in a full display pattern. Not threat, not aggression. It was the layered, formal movement of a Dracari making an official declaration, the patterns the honor guard would recognize, the patterns that, if they were recorded and submitted, would hold legal weight. In 3 separate Dracari jurisdictions. She said, in our tradition, when a Warmother is separated from her young during the period of their transition, and another person serves as anchor in her absence, that person is given a name. Darren opened his mouth. Vara said, not a title, not a rank, a declaration. It is entered into record. It travels with you. Every Dracari who encounters you and knows this name will understand what it means. Darren closed his mouth. Vara gave him the name. She said it in Dracari first, then gave him the standard translation, one who holds the line in the dark. She said, if you are ever in Dracari territory, if you are ever in danger, if you speak this name, it will be recognized. Any Dracari who hears it will know what debt it represents. Darren was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read, which was rare. Then he said, I really just sang through a door. Yes, Vara said, and my sons are standing in front of me. He had no answer to that. She said, do not say it was nothing. I will not accept that. Darren looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. He said, I don't know what to say. Then say nothing, Vara said. This is not a gift. It is a debt acknowledged. Those are different things. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she turned. She walked toward the boarding ramp without looking back. Her sons fell into step behind her. Her honor guard moved. The sounds of departure began. Boots on the ramp, seals engaging, systems responding to the presence of the ship, preparing to release. At the top of the ramp, Rail looked back. Just once. His markings fired a single bright pulse, the warm gold of deep sleep, the color that meant safety found, carried now into waking, and then he was inside. And the ramp was closing, and the bay was doing the long mechanical work of letting something go. Darren stood where he was. After a while, Holt came to stand beside him. He said, you know what that name means, right? The one she gave you. Darren said, she translated it. Holt said, I mean in terms of what it actually does. Practically, legally, within their system. Darren said he was not entirely sure. Holt said, I'll explain it. It's going to take a while. You want to grab something to eat while I do? Darren looked at the closed ramp for another second. He said, yeah, okay. They walked out of the bay. Behind them, the seals finished cycling. The ship was already gone. The warship did not cloak immediately. It pulled away from Bravo at a steady, unhurried speed, which was either a courtesy or a statement, and no one could agree which. The station scanner tracked it for 11 minutes before it made the transit jump. Then it was just open space again, the same dark it had always been, as if the whole thing had been a question the galaxy had asked and then quietly taken back. On the warship, Vara was alone. She had sent the honor guard to their stations. She had spoken briefly to her second in command, confirmed their heading, and then gone to her quarters and sealed the door. This was not unusual. After a mission, regardless of the outcome, Vara required a period of solitary debrief. Her crew respected it. Without needing to be told twice, she sat down and pulled up the acoustic file. Her translation implant had been running the whole time she was on the station. It recorded everything and filed it, which was standard operating procedure. She had never gone back through a recording for personal reasons before. She told herself this was analysis. She was nearly convinced. She found the file from the second night, the one her implant had captured, through the door of the holding room, from the corridor outside. She played it. The voice was rough and not particularly skilled. Not trained. The kind of singing that people do when they are not performing but are simply producing sound because they want to. The melody was simple, a repeating structure that rose and fell in an easy pattern that even a damaged translator could follow. The Dracari phonetic system had very little overlap with standard vowels, and her implant flagged 17% of the words as low confidence. Translation. What it did catch came through in pieces. Something about a road. Something about a long way home. Something about a light that stays on so you know where to come back to. Vara sat with the file for a while after it ended. She thought about the wars, not the current ceasefire further back. The first contact period, when both species had done what most species do when they meet something they do not understand in the dark of space. They had prepared for it to try to kill them. They had fought over border systems that neither side truly needed and had spent lives on both sides buying territory that had since been demilitarized and forgotten. She had been a junior officer then. She had risen through ranks that were built partly on the foundation of that war. She thought about the version of herself that had filed humans under threat and left them there without looking again. She thought about Rail's markings firing gold in a station lounge. She opened a private channel, not a military report, not an intelligence brief. She flagged it as a personal cultural note to the Dracari High Commands. Xenological Archive, which was the correct channel for observations that did not yet have a category but needed to be on record somewhere. She said, "The humans have a behavior for which I have no tactical category. When confronted with fear in another creature, they respond to it before they have finished determining whether they are responsible for it. I do not know the limits of this behavior. I do not know if it is consistent across their species or concentrated in certain individuals. I believe it may be important." She closed the channel. She did not send a follow-up. She did not annotate it. She filed it and let it sit in the archive where someone, someday, might look at it and understand what she had been trying to say. At Relay Station Bravo, Darren was doing the incident report. It was a standard xenobiological interaction form, 8 sections, most of which did not apply to what had actually happened. He had skipped section 4 entirely because it asked about containment measures used, and he did not know how to explain that there had been no containment, just a door and a song and patience. He reached the open response section near the end. It said, "Describe actions taken during the non-standard interaction." He looked at it for a while. He thought about Holt's explanation over dinner. The part about what the name meant, the part about what it would do in Dracari space, the part about the neurological window, and what would have happened if the spiral had run to its end. He typed, "Subjects appeared to be in distress." Sat with them. Sang for a while. They calmed down. He submitted the form. He turned off his work screen. He picked up his personal tablet and laid down on the couch, his couch, the station's couch, the couch. That was just a couch again now, and went back to whatever he had been reading. Before the warship had arrived and changed the specific, unremarkable shape of a regular day, somewhere between a human station and the far edge of Dracari space, in the shared silence of open transit, 2 very different kinds of people were carrying the same 3 seconds in a lounge that smelled like recycled air. Vara, in the dark of her quarters, with a song on repeat that her translator could only half understand. Darren, on a couch, scrolling, occasionally glancing at the spot on his chest, where a claw had briefly rested over his heartbeat like a question that had already found its answer. Neither of them had the words for what had passed between a Warmather and a soldier who had only ever been trying to help. But the galaxy is old and long and full of things that have no words yet. Some of them are the worst things. The violence and the silence and the species that looked at each other across the dark and chose fear first. Some of them are this. And this one got remembered.